Good evening and welcome to the Town of Garner Town Council work session this evening, March 25th. Last week I mentioned it was one of the prettiest days yet in Garner, but I believe it's outdone itself. Today's even prettier than last week. I'm glad you're here. We'll start out with a roll call.
Mr. Justin?
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Vance?
Here.
Councilmember Behringer?
Here.
Councilmember Dellinger?
Here.
Councilmember Matthews?
Here.
Councilmember Singleton?
Here.
Excellent. We have a very interesting agenda this evening. Lots of good information being brought to our attention. Lots of discussion I'm sure will follow. And we will start by asking for a motion to adopt the agenda.
So moved. Second.
Okay. Moved by Mr. Singleton, seconded by Mr. Matthews. All in favor of adopting the agenda, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed by nay? Hearing none, it's unanimous. We will go by this agenda. That's great. And the first one is particularly interesting today. We have a special presenter who's a very closely involved person that we work with a lot, though he's always so far behind the scenes we rarely see him. But I'm going to leave the official introduction and the accolades for our special guest. Well, I'm going to leave that up to our finance director, David Beck.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Good evening, Council. My pleasure to introduce Mr. Marcus Kinraid, the Wake County Tax Administrator this evening. Of course, Wake County is our partner on levying and collecting the property taxes here in the town of Garner, and it's a very beneficial relationship for the town. Appreciate the hard work that Marcus and his staff put into that each and every day. And this is a presentation we had planned for the retreat, and unfortunately had to punt it a little bit because Marcus was under the weather, and glad he's feeling better now. So he's got a presentation to share some information on growth and reval after making it through the last reval in 2024. And then we have a Q&A session at the end to talk about some things that may impact tax values and assessments. So with that, I'll turn it over to Marcus.
Thank you, David. Good evening, council members. Marcus Kinraid, tax administrator, proud resident of Garner for the last 20 years. Apologize for not being able to come in February. I don't get sick often, but I was sick, and I don't think that you would have appreciated me sharing what I had. So I'm glad to be here tonight and feeling great. I just want to update you on what we're seeing in Wake County in terms of growth, talk about the reevaluation in our rearview mirror, talk about the appeals and the status of those appeals, and then answer any questions you might have for me. So I think you're all aware that Wake County is growing like crazy. We just saw the 2024 census data last week, and it showed that 66 people are now moving to Wake County every day, which is the highest number I've ever seen in my career. In 2016, the Wake County Commissioners shortened the revaluation cycle from 8 years to 4 years. And since then, in the 9 years since then, we've added 75,000 parcels in Wake County. That's the equivalent of Alamance County. We've grown we have grown by the size of Alamance County in the last 9 years. If you want to break the parcel count down by jurisdictions, this sort of trends the way you'd expect. The smaller jurisdictions are growing percentage-wise fastest. That's just the way the math shakes out. Anger, very, very small bleed over from Harnett County into Wake, but they've added 521 parcels, or 243% growth in Wake County. Wendell, Zebulon, Fuquay Varina, Rollsville are all growing fast. Garner's about halfway up the list, but if you just look at the last 4 or 5 years, I think Garner's pretty close to the top of the list. In terms of where the growth is occurring, the majority of it is occurring within the municipal jurisdictions and not in the rural fire district. So only about 4,000 of these new parcels are in the rural fire district, unincorporated area of the county. Most of the growth is in the corporate limits where we want to see it at the county. In terms of the 2024 revaluation, I think maybe you've all seen this before. I might have showed it to you last spring, but this is how the real property tax base changed through the 2024 revaluation. Overall, countywide, on a 4-year cycle, we saw a 51% increase. When you look at other jurisdictions that are doing revaluations this year for 2025, all the jurisdictions around us to the east and west, the southwest, to the southeast, they're all doing revaluations this year. Johnston County completed a revaluation. It was a 6-year cycle. Following this 6-year cycle, they're stepping down to a 4-year cycle. They saw a 70% increase. You may have seen that on the news. Durham County did a revaluation for 2025, 6-year cycle. They're stepping down to a 4-year cycle. They saw a 75% increase with the revaluation. Orange County did a revaluation, 49% increase. Chatham County's working on a revaluation. Haven't seen their statistics and numbers yet, but pretty substantial increase. So the trend is, as we've come through COVID and recovered, the market values have just shot up tremendously. Lots of sticker shock, valuation sticker shock associated with these revaluations. I'm sure you all know by now that the county commissioners have chosen to further shorten the cycle now, stepping down 3 and then 2 years. So the next revaluation will be effective for January 1, 2027, followed by a revaluation in 2029, 2031, etc. The goal is to try to get the valuation sticker shock out of the process. In terms of appeals, there's 2 types of appeals that we offer through the revaluation. An informal appeal process. We accepted informal appeals through the end of February last year. We had about 15,900 of those, which actually was quite low. It was only a 3.7% appeal rate countywide. So 3.7 out of every 100 properties appealed. Far lower than we expected, considering how big of a valuation increase it was. An informal appeal is just that. We just review it in the tax office. An appraiser looks at it, looks at whatever information the property owner submitted, makes a quick determination whether an adjustment is warranted or not, and we send a result letter back. Our goal was to review all of the informal appeals and send a result letter back in time for property owners to decide whether or not they wanted to file a formal Board of E&R appeal. The deadline to file a formal appeal was May 15th. We saw a spike in filings of formal appeals the first and second week of May. The deadline to appeal was May 15th. We had a pretty good spike because the county and all of our municipal jurisdictions started talking about budgets and tax rate increases, things like that, budgetary needs, and that may have caused some protection appeals. So the appeal rate for the formal appeals was actually higher than the last 2 cycles. Still not terribly bad, 2.1%, 8,935 formal Board of E&R appeals. When we're dealing with 430,000 parcels, it's a pretty low number. Something that is unique in terms of the 2024 revaluation was that we were not able to finish all of the formal Board of E&R appeals within the calendar year. If you look at the 3rd column, 4th row from the top, we carried over 977 formal appeals into calendar year 2025. And our goal is to finish those appeals on March 27th. I think that's next week. Maybe that's this week. I've lost track of my dates. We're finishing these this month. Those were mostly commercial appeals, pretty large values. What we saw during the process, particularly after we sent out the bills in July, we received some spirited feedback on the billing. There were quite a few tax rate increases, some pretty substantial tax rate increases, pretty much across the board. So we did receive quite a bit of feedback. I'm sure that you all did too. I don't think anyone was spared from feedback. And what we saw at the hearings for the Board of E&R was that far more people were showing up in person. And quite frequently, they weren't talking about their value. They were talking about their tax bill, or complaining about their tax bill, or saying they couldn't pay their tax bill, or seeking relief. So that really slowed down the process. Our board members, like Mr. Matthews, had the honor of serving on the Board of E&R, and there were a lot of long days last year. Typically, in years past, we would have lulls in the agenda where you could catch up and review appeals as you went. And pretty much last year, you just sat and listened to people appeal all day. And then at 5:30, you started going back through the docket, and they were some really long days. So it slowed the process down quite significantly. So again, we're trying to finish that up here this month. And then we'll turn our attention to state property tax appeals. Someone who disagrees with the value from the Board of E&R can appeal to the state. Right now, I think we've got about 1,000 of those appeals to deal with. And then it's just breaking out the appeal rate by jurisdiction. There's a couple of jurisdictions that are highlighted here in pink. They were the jurisdictions that had the highest tax rate increases. And you can sort of see as the tax rate goes, so does the appeal rate. Garner had a 1.8% formal appeal rate to the Board of E&R. It's pretty low appeal rate. In terms of measuring the market as we've come through 2024 and comparing that to our assessed values, what we're seeing on 17,500 sales is roughly an increase of about 5% in the market for calendar year 2024. Sales have slowed down as interest rates have stayed high. As we look forward to 2027, something that we heard very clearly feedback from the public was they assumed that jurisdictions were going to be revenue neutral. And there was never any promise or assumption that taxing jurisdictions were going to adopt revenue neutral tax rates. I think part of the confusion was the county, we built a tool in 2020, an online tool, which most of you have probably seen, where you can go to our website, look up your property, see what the county's estimated revenue neutral tax rate is. We also made it optional for our municipal partners to participate. In 2024 of our jurisdictions of 12 participated. In 2024, 2 of our jurisdictions of 12 participated. I was glad to see Garner participated both times. We appreciate that for transparency's sake. But there was just an assumption, because most municipal jurisdictions didn't have their rate out there, and because the county didn't adopt a revenue neutral rate, that we'd hoodwink the public or were not honest with the public. So as we go forward, we are going to work harder to enforce transparency with our online tools. We're going to enhance the online calculator, the neutral calculator, to show all the jurisdictions neutral rates. If jurisdictions don't want to give them to me, I'm just going to have to calculate it myself and put it in there. We'll add a what-if option to the calculator so that people, as they monitor budget presentations, they can plug in the tax rate that the jurisdictions are thinking about adopting, and they can see what that would do for their tax bill. And we're going to leave the tool up all the way through the appeals process and all the way through sending out the bills so people can see what was proposed and what happened, just to be transparent and completely honest with people to show what's going on. Oops, did something. We're also redesigning our bills. I'm sure you've all seen our bills. They're combined. The county and the municipal rates are stacked. The taxes are stacked. There's only one logo on the bill. It's the Wake County logo. There's only one customer service phone number on the bill. It's the Wake County customer service line. So our county commissioners took a beating this past year, a real beating, and so did the tax office. And a lot of that had to do with some municipal rates that were really high. So we're going to redesign the bills to separate out the two jurisdictions. And if it's Garner taxes, it's going to have the Garner logo beside the taxes to sort of share the glory and the pain. Any questions about the revaluation, the process, the results? We'd be glad to try to answer those.
Before we jump into the questions, Marcus, I just want to go on the record as thanking you for what you do, not just for the county, but particularly for the town of Garner. Being a resident for 20 years, I'm sure we hold a special place in your heart. We don't get a different rate or different vow, but we feel like we've always gotten great feedback, great participation and information from you and your team. So thank you very much for what you're doing. Sometimes it's a thankless job, I can imagine, because you're always telling the citizens their tax value is going up, which means their taxes are going up, and your municipal clients are always saying, but we need more money. You know, where's the balance? So thank you for what you do. And with that, I'm sure there are some good questions that folks have. So we'll just start to answer this in, Mr. Vance.
Yes. Marcus, you mentioned, I just want to be clear, that the Wake County Commissioners have agreed to go down to a 2-year reevaluation period,
Yes, sir.
and that our next reevaluation will be coming in 2027.
Correct.
Okay, and before then, the evaluation periods were how long?
Every 4 years.
Every 4 years, so now we're going down to 2 years, and the purpose of doing that is to
Try to reduce the valuation sticker shock that's associated with the longer cycle.
Okay, all right.
I don't have a specific question. I was interested in the Q&A after the question slide, so I'm going to wait for that.
Okay. Other
I got a
specific
question.
Yes.
Welcome. Glad to have you again. Always a pleasure. I was discussing, as we grow and we look at revenue, especially with all the growth, we try to find our developers to design and build projects, homes, et cetera, that more than pay for themselves with cost of services and what have you. And so I got in a commercial discussion. We're talking about data centers. And so it was an assumption, or they thought that a data center, the only thing taxable would be the building itself and the land, not the equipment on the inside, computers and what have you. Can you clarify that? I hope I asked that correctly.
No, the majority of the value of a data center is the equipment, servers and whatnot on the inside, and it's most definitely taxable.
Okay.
But that equipment depreciates extremely fast. So you have to have constant churn of replacing the equipment in the data center to keep the value up. They're very volatile.
Thank you, sir. That was my question.
Yep.
I asked him a question earlier. He answered my question. It was about older houses that hadn't sold in 40 or 50 years and no permits had been pulled, and then houses beside it had permits been pulled, and how the evaluation, what the county had, was substantially higher. And he answered the question. If you have permits pulled, somebody spends $100,000 reevaluating a house. That's why the tax value is in this case, $130,000 more, because somebody has recently, done a lot of work at the home, so he answered my question.
So the upgrades do get calculated into the current valuation.
They do, and this is a particularly recurring theme in Garner. If you look at the housing stock in Garner, it's about 12,000 homes, and half of them are more than 25 years old. So Garner kind of matured earlier than most jurisdictions in Wake, and then sort of flattened out for a while, and then just lately it started to boom. Where other jurisdictions, Fuquay, Varina, Holly Springs, Apex, they really boomed starting 10 to 15 years ago. So it's Garner's turn to boom again. But those older homes, we try to pay particular attention to the sales and review those sales to determine if substantial renovations have occurred. If they have, we will increase the effective year built. So my house was built in 1974. If I did a full home upgrade and sold it, we may increase the effective year built to 2000. And what that does is it overrides the depreciation rates in our appraisal software and increases the value. Whereas, if someone's owned their home for 50 years and they're just living in it, and they haven't really done any substantial upgrades, haven't pulled any major permits other than typical maintenance, we try to leave them alone because we're not interested in increasing their value, to where it's unreasonable.
I appreciate the information. That helps.
Okay, I know there's a section for some more specific questions.
Yeah,
Go right ahead.
In the breakdown, there's the residential and commercial, and there's sort of the commingling of apartment, residential, and that commercial. And I guess my question is, when you're evaluating those apartment complexes as commercial real estate, does that vary based on where? How do you do that calculation? Does it vary depending on where it is in the county, or is it based on income, or is it just based on the quality?
To a certain extent. So we value apartments using the income approach to value.
Okay.
That's why we classify them as commercial, because they're investment properties. Typically, they're owned by investors who want to get an income stream from those properties. So we have to calculate a net operating income, and then we divide that by a capitalization rate to determine the value. Things that are included in the net operating income are vacancy rates, rental rates, and expense rates. So a new apartment complex typically has high rental rates because it's new. It has low vacancy rates after it fills up because it's new. And it has low expense rates because it's new. So that's going to increase the net operating income, higher value. As an apartment complex ages, the vacancy rate increases because it's aging. The expense ratios increase because they have to spend more to renovate it. So the values drop pretty quickly. In terms of the capitalization rate, part of the cap rate includes the investor's desire to pay the property taxes. They want that paid back annually so that they can pay the property taxes. So the higher the tax rate, the lower the value. So, Garner's got a little bit higher tax rate than, say, Cary or Apex. So the cap rate would be higher in Garner for an apartment complex, lower value, slightly lower value.
So how do you all get the numbers for that net operating
We
income?
partner with a commercial vendor to extract it from the market.
Well, that's very interesting. Would you mind elaborating on that apartment valuation again? We're pretty comfortable looking at our houses and saying, well, you've appraised it at 500,000, and that seemed reasonable because my neighbor just sold his for 550 or something like that. We kind of understand it's related to the sales price. But on apartments, you're saying apartment buildings, apartment complexes are not evaluated by the sales price or the comps, as a realtor would say, but based on net operating income.
We'll consider the sales approach for a mature apartment, but we look mostly at the income approach, and we'll try to reconcile the two. And they should be similar. You should be able to reconcile all the approaches to value, the cost approach, the sales comparison approach, and the income approach, and reconcile them all to sort of come to the same conclusion. But we rely on the income approach because the sales comparison approach, sometimes some things can go into that don't necessarily make sense. And if you hang your hat on that, you may be way too high or way too low.
Gotcha. In a general sense, looking back at single-family homes, which most of us in Garner live in, and we're talking about the assessed value on those, is there a rough rule of thumb, if the home recently sold for $500,000, would you expect the assessed value to be close to $500,000 or slightly less?
Well, we can't chase the sale or adjust it in a non-revaluation year, but we certainly will look at that sales price the next time we come around to a revaluation. And now that we'll be doing it more frequently, you should see the assessed values across the board staying much closer to the market. You know, we used to be on an 8-year cycle, and if a house sold in the first year of the cycle, you were stuck with that value for the next 7 years. So I think in terms of keeping your tax base fresh, trying to take pressure off of your tax rate, and getting the most out of growth, it makes sense to do a revaluation as frequently as you possibly can, because you're putting all that new construction in the tax base very close to market value rather than at a substantial discount.
Is it your thought that that's perhaps some of the cause of the sticker shock on the reval? People were used to 8 years at the same old price, which 5 or 6 or 7 years into it, their house was well assessed at well below the market value. And then suddenly you come back along after 8 years and adjust for that.
Yeah.
And it was a 30, 40, 50% perhaps increase in the assessed value because they waited too long at the old value, I guess.
That's absolutely right. Yeah.
Yeah.
And we've, in gathering market data to suggest to the commissioners that we shorten the cycle, we studied what nationwide, what the fastest growing jurisdictions with a population greater than 1 million, how do they operate? And most of those jurisdictions are in Texas, Florida, Virginia, some are in California, and they all do it annually. Every year they do a revaluation. That was too far for us to go. This is too substantial of a project for us just to go to an annual cycle. And we also looked at where people are moving here from. You know, where is all the 66 people that move here every day? Where are they coming from? They're coming from California, Texas, Illinois, Chicago area, Virginia, Washington, D.C., Florida. And what are they used to? They're used to an annual cycle. So I can't tell you how many people last year called and they were mad. They had just moved here and they were mad because they assumed that there was some sort of a de facto homestead exemption or something, a fractional assessment where the assessed values were significantly less than the sales price because they may have paid $750,000 for the home and we had $600,000 on it. And then 1 year later, we adjusted the value to $750,000, and they thought that we had, pulled a trick on them, and they just didn't realize we were on a 4-year revaluation cycle.
Again, making up for lost time. That's very helpful. Did you have some other comments you want to make about the tax value impacts? And I see you have another page in the outline over here. Was that a separate topic? What impacts it? What impacts the assessed value of my home? How do you come up with how to assess the value of my home? Ownership structure, neighborhood amenities?
Sure. So when it was built, we sent an appraiser out there and we measured it and we picked it up, we put it in our CAMA software. So we tried to gather all of the statistics of your home. Okay. Every time we do a revaluation, we have to generate what's called a uniform schedule of values. That's what this is. And publish this. This is basically all of the parameters in our appraisal software, all the ranges, all the different types of characteristics of a home. And then we use sales in your neighborhood to tune the parameters in this book, in our appraisal software, to assess your home. If it's sold, likely your assessment will be close to what it sold for. Or if it didn't sell, we're going to try to compare your home to one that did as best we can and use that as the basis for assessing your home. It's a challenging and tricky thing to do when you're dealing with over 300,000 residential parcels, but generally speaking, I think we do a pretty decent job of it if you look at the appeal rate. In terms of, I think there may have been some questions about, how do you get the growth to pay for itself? What can you do? As I look around Garner, I see a lot of things that I think are going to pay dividends in the future. I think you're making great use of the land. I see a lot of townhomes going up, lots of units per acre. That should help. I think if you look at Holly Springs, which boomed tremendously around 2010 to 2015, the properties that were being built there averaged about 2,700 square feet. And I don't think that's the preferred size anymore. I think, with the cost of construction, the cost of insurance, the cost of utilities, with property taxes going up, I think that the taste and preference of the future is smaller and easier to maintain. So I think what's being built in Garner now is probably going to be what people are preferring as you go out 10 to 15 years, not the big homes, hard to maintain homes, expensive homes. So we'll see. But I like what I see. More dense construction, more affordable construction. And as Western Wake runs out of land, and as more people telework, they're not driving to RTP anymore, I think they're looking for bargains, or lower, maybe not a bargain, but a lower price point. So I think that's what's driving the boom in Wake County.
Other questions, comments? You look like you're poised for another question.
No, he touched on almost everything, what they value. Some of the things listed here play a part of it, but what he talks about more is the value of the home when it was built and the footprint and so forth. Yeah, the amenities played apparently a very small role in that you're looking at the value of the home than the property itself, not everything that's around it, other than homes that you compare it to, as you say, other homes in the neighborhood that you compare comparable sales.
Yes, sir.
And yes, I agree. And as you say, once you get down to the 2-year cycle and you can look at recent sales of similar neighborhoods, et cetera, you get closer and closer to the real value and an accurate market value, and your figures reflect that more.
I would hope on a 2-year cycle we will never fall below 15% below fair market value. It would really be a big booming economy, for a 15% increase in 2 years. So I think we'll get less appeals, fewer appeals, less outcry as people get more used to the process. When something happens every 4 years, it kind of scares people, but maybe 2 years won't be so bad. And also, as we do something twice as often, I would hope we get better and better at it. So.
Well, excellent. Most informative. I'm glad to see we got our questions answered. This was all good stuff. Mr. Beck, anything you'd like to add?
No, if council doesn't have any additional questions, I think that takes care of it.
Mr. Mayor, I wanted to, it's on the screen. I was curious about the impact of amenities on the assessments.
Like, what kind of amenities? Like trails?
Open space. Parks and pools and trails, and
yeah.
Does have substantial impacts or
it wouldn't impact our assessment per se, except to the extent that it's baked into what people are paying. So we really can't extract it. It's not like we assess a greenway trail or open space separately, but that is definitely a factor that people consider when they're buying. So it's sort of baked in.
Thank you. Good question, good answer. Yeah. When it goes back to what was the sales price, then if people paid more because they like being near the green space, they like having pools and trails, then that neighborhood
Yeah.
elevates accordingly to all of that. Makes
Yeah,
some sense.
and again, as a 20-year resident, I think that, the things I've seen occurring in Garner over the last 20 years is it's impressive. Lots of parks, lots of greenways, lots of trails, rec centers, all that. It's good stuff. One thing my wife complains about, and I don't know if it would make any difference, is she complains that there's not enough fine dining in Garner. So anyway,
Me
We
too.
hear that a lot.
Tell her me too, yeah.
Sort of a qualitative answer, I'm sure, you mentioned what Garner's done in the past 10 or 15 years. What have you seen other municipalities are doing development-wise in vertical density that are what are the impact on their revenues and tax rolls versus regular townhomes? Because you're seeing a lot of mixed-use vertical development, downtown Cary, places like that. North Hills is all we talk about that. And what are you seeing is there net benefit or net negative to doing that type of development where it's appropriate?
I think as long as there are attractions in those centers to spur dense development around it, it's a net positive for sure. I was very skeptical of what Holly Springs was doing with the baseball field and all that on the north side of town, right near the landfill. Very skeptical, but seems to have worked.
Thank you.
Okay, excellent. Great information. Thank you very much, gentlemen. You're welcome to stick around for the rest of the program. You might have some questions. Thanks again.
Thank you. Pleasure.
And that brings us to item D on the agenda. This has to do with zoning amendments and the effects of Senate Bill 385. We'll be calling on our presenter, our planning director, Mr. Jeff Triesenberg. Glad you're back, Jeff.
So good evening, Mayor, council members. Good to be here with you at this work session. We've got a couple of items that the planning department has been working on somewhat in conjunction with the legal department. The first one here was just to give you an update on the impacts of Senate Bill 382. This was the bill that was passed that made a change to the definition of downzoning. And so you see on page 19 here, items 1 and 2 constitute what used to be considered downzoning. But Senate Bill 382 then added this third definition, which is applicable only to what they coin as not residential zoning. There's certainly some debate as to where mixed-use zoning districts fall within this. For purposes of our analysis here in the town of Garner, we relied on the UDO table, which uses kind of a header in the use table of which ones are residential and which ones are non-residential. So our mixed-use zoning districts, we feel, are kind of on that non-residential side. And this new definition of downzoning in those non-residential zoning districts, if you're creating any kind of non-conformity, that is considered downzoning now. And if we've adopted any ordinances that would result in that kind of downzoning, those ordinances are now null, void, unenforceable, and it's the whole ordinance, not just the pieces that are in conflict. So we went through and looked at the ordinances that we had adopted. There were actually 9 of them that fell into the time frame that was impacted, but only one of those 9 resulted in any significant concerns, and that was Ordinance 5286. And if you'll remember, this is the one that we kind of divided into 2 pieces. This is our most recent amendment, apart from the stormwater things that we're considering now. But you'll see there on page 21 that we kind of broke down the specific items that we feel are in conflict with this state bill. But clearly, again, if there were any, we could have just had one, and it would have resulted in that ordinance being null and void. So where kind of do we go from here? We feel like we have kind of 3 courses of action. Obviously, this is affecting everybody in the state. There's been a slew of discussion amongst planners at the League of Municipalities, amongst the legal groups, and there's a lot of jurisdictions that have pursued their own individual bills to try to exempt themselves from this new legislation. So one of the things that, in talking to my colleagues, most folks seem to kind of be taking a wait and see approach, at least for a little while, because there have been a number of bills that have been introduced to potentially overturn this part of Senate Bill 382. I know the legal department and planning both have been kind of following that. There is a bill which was first introduced as House Bill 24 that is a statewide reversal. It now has a companion bill in the Senate, so that is, I think, encouraging, and both have bipartisan support. So that's Senate Bill 419. Then there's 2 other local bills on the Senate side that cover Wake County. So if those were to gain any traction, we could be included under that. Most recently, I just noticed today, and I had a chance, Terry's nodding her head, she saw it, was Senate Bill 587, which is a larger bill about addressing the definition of nonconformity that would also revoke that change. But then I think it also introduces some other changes that we might have some concerns about as well. So certainly we can take the wait and see approach. If there are pieces, though, of 5286 that we want to go ahead and firmly get on the books, we could certainly also readopt those sections and take a look at changing, seeing what we can alter about the offending pieces to try to make them not be offending. I kind of feel like it might be premature to do that at this point, and I would hate for us to rework something just to get it on the books and then find out that maybe what we originally had and our original intent could have been preserved. So part of me wants to kind of suggest that maybe we just continue to monitor this for a few more months. And then, of course, a third option would be, if we really wanted to, we could certainly press to have an exemption bill of our own. But given the number that are on the books already, I don't know how much that would really be of benefit to us either. So really just wanted to, again, give you an update on that Senate bill. Currently, if somebody pushes back on any of the changes in Ordinance 5286, technically, I can't hold their feet to the fire to those amendments. We're certainly trying to encourage applicants to continue in that direction. And so far, we haven't gotten much in the way of pushback on that. So again, just would ask you for your opinions on how you would like to direct us, and if legal has anything that they'd like to add, would certainly turn it over to them for comments as well.
So there is a local bill in the House and a local bill in the Senate that would include Wake County municipalities in the exemptions. So as Jeff said, we're waiting to see where these bills go. It's not clear on the action of the down zoning bill. part of the difficulty is that it was a veto override, so its effective date went essentially 6 months prior, which I don't think was anticipated. So there's also not a clear process for how you readopt. Do we have to go through the entire process where it's referred to the Planning Commission for consistency and then comes back to council? So at this point, because I don't think we have any developers or property owners relying on those changes that were adopted last August, that we don't feel pressured to go in and try to fix something that might not, at the end of the day, need to be fixed if the authority is restored for either statewide or just for the municipalities in Wake County.
Okay, excellent. That's a good summary. My perception of what you're saying is that a lot of jurisdictions are taking a little bit of a wait and see attitude. Is it repealed? Is it modified? And to also pay attention to any decisions we might be making in that period that would be changed or be sensitive to what impact it might have on a decision that would come up. Many decisions will come up in the next 6 months that may not be impacted by this at all. But you can give us a little red flag when you see one of those coming. Okay. So that
For rezonings, we started in the fall requiring that the property owner sign consents to that. So
yes.
That's insulated us in a lot of the rezoning, and we have been fortunate we haven't done a lot of text amendments in that time.
Excellent. Okay, what other questions, comments from council members? Mr. Matthews, Mr. Singleton?
So you're just recommending right now, or maybe suggesting that we just wait and see what may get adopted in the General Assembly, in the House and Senate, and just, before we make any drastic action?
Yes. Yeah, like I said, I'm most encouraged by the fact that companion Senate bill appeared to the statewide House bill. So I think certainly by the end of this fiscal year, we should have some clues as to whether or not that has picked up any steam.
Okay, good. Questions, comments? Okay, are you getting a sense of what you wanted to know?
But we would recommend, if you do talk to any state legislators, that we do want our downzoning authority to be restored, because it may have an impact on some commercial developments happening in the future.
Right. Yeah, in some ways, as usual, the legislature sometimes seems to take a sledgehammer to a fly, but that's their prerogative. They may be overreacting. There's many subtleties here, and we appreciate the flexibility that comes to be able to make those decisions. Okay. Well, that being said, then I think while you're up, we can move right along to item number 2, which has to do with residential special use permits.
Yes, so this item was requested to come back up for discussion amongst you all. I believe it largely followed the presentation or the meeting with the Triangle Community Coalition a few months ago, where again the development community expressed some concerns about the residential SUP threshold. I know we've discussed it before, so I won't, dive into anything in great detail about it, but I did provide just a little bit of data based on projects that you have looked at in the past, which one of those had changes that were, imposed on the developer between the rezoning and that special use permit being granted. Most of them were apartment projects, and that is something that I can lead into some of the options that we have for you that you may want to discuss. Again, it's specifically section 4.742, any residential development or subdivision involving 200 dwelling units or more. Certainly, options are to leave it as is, or to repeal that section in full. But I think there's also some maybe worth discussing some alternatives in between. I did put one in there that had been suggested by someone from the development community, that perhaps a tier 2, if a project had gone through a tier 2 rezoning package where council had basically seen the site plan or subdivision plan, that maybe in those cases an SUP would be exempted. I think the key here from our perspective, again, is just to keep it objective. If we are going to change it, we could look at anything from making a different threshold, tying it to whether or not it's gone through the tier 1 or tier 2. We could separate out apartments from single family and townhomes. There's different ways, depending on what you feel might still be warranted to come forward with an SUP. If you feel that there are other pieces or other types of projects that don't. But again, at the Triangle Community Coalition, that was the one item that I know, I think you all, several of you were there. We received some feedback on, and so the direction was given to have us all discuss it again, and so here we are, and I'm prepared to just offer any observations and legal as well to weigh in on any proposed changes that we may or may not want to make.
Thank you for an excellent presentation and for bringing this item up. It is important. We do want to exercise our right to demand the highest level of development. We do want to get quality. It's how do we do that in a fair and just way and consistent way. On a previous slide, Jeff, I think you listed 3 single-family residential subdivisions. Yes, sorry. Okay, they were here at the top of mine. Let's look at those 3 right there as an example of my very primitive understanding of this. We use SUPs in lots of ways, and we use it in regular zoning, permitted use, as long as it's in that zoning. But within that zoning, it may also require special use permit for this special use. Example, electronic gambling. Even though it's available in that zoning, it also has to get the special use permit based on the details of that specific site and that specific business. We're not talking about doing away with that SUP. We've also expanded the flexibility of SUPs over the last couple of years for large commercial. We've made some exceptions and some categories that moves through. So we're not too concerned about that in this particular episode. Right now, we seem to be talking about residential, which are mostly, there are some apartments, there's a lot of detached family, single family, and attached. And if we look at these 3 that you have listed there, Village at Garner Station, Homestead at Bryan Farms, and Bethel Green, these are good examples, I think, that we should look at to try to decide, are we, in these specific situations, whatever their track was, did that get the desired product, the desired result, and it was fair to everybody involved? And the 2 most recent ones, Homestead at Bryan Farms and Bethel Green, I think are fresh in our memory. They weren't quite as confusing as the very large Village at Garner Station with multi-use and different categories. So those last 2, to my recollection, Jeff, both of these, of course, are residential. Both of these came in as Tier 2 requests for rezoning, which are the Tier 2, which has a lot of detail, such as we looked at this morning. I think 3 councilmen came to the meeting this morning with the D.R. Horton project at a Tier 2, and there was every park bench, every bicycle rack, every walking trail, great level of detail in a Tier 2 rezoning. Not to be confused with the Tier 1, where an SUP might be needed. But if we're just looking at ones that come in for rezoning, residential, Tier 2, it could be that we're being redundant after going to that level of detail to come back again, looking at the same conditions, the same details, to apply a different lens that's costly and time consuming, not just to the developer, not just to the council, but to the staff to run through. So that's kind of my primitive understanding of what we're talking about here.
So yes, I would largely agree that that's the argument that the development community is presenting. These 3 projects are 3 that have been through the rezoning process but have yet to come back to you for the SUPs. So they are definitely in that process right now. I think Terry would probably advise you all again that there are some differences between the processes. The one is definitely the zoning is much more back and forth, getting to that common ground. Whereas the SUP does give you, within the parameters of your special use criteria, the ability to impose. So that is a little different approach. Does that mean we can accomplish everything in the zoning? No. But again, that's kind of the one thing that I have noticed is that in some cases over time, there may be things that come up into the council's mind that maybe were not on the radar 6 to 8 months ago. There may be an opportunity, depending on the issue, to address that in the SUP. But if things are moving fairly quickly, then that probably becomes less of a likelihood to happen. But that certainly, there is a different approach to both, and I think that is something that's the flip side of the coin to keep in mind.
Okay, well, let's get questions and comments from council on this.
Just a question here. I agree with the tier 2 because, we get a chance to see everything, and sometimes we can see it with our earlier meetings, like our 2-1 meetings, and which is an ideal time to share thoughts and feedback back and forth before they come in under the lights, as I like to call it here. But if it's a tier 2 and we've done our due diligence before it goes, then send it to the planning commission, I agree with the mayor. There's no need just to keep doing the same thing over and over. If we've done a good job when it's presented to us and make our comments, and if they need to redo something, we can always let them go back and work on it and bring it to us again at another meeting we'll have. So we always got that option there if they want to correct something, that we extend their presentation to another date to come back. So we've corrected that and got with staff. So it's just, we can fix those things. So that's not totally off the table as I'm understanding this. But if, like I said, if with tier 2, I'm in agreement with the mayor on, I think we can do our due diligence and send it to planning commission and not have to keep dragging things out for the staff and for the board as well as the development community if we do a good job on that tier 2 when it's presented to us. Just a thought.
So that's the point of view. And again, we're not making a decision tonight. We're talking about it, discussing it, and we'll see what step we want to take next, if any. Mr. Singleton, comments, questions?
Well, let's look at Village at Garner Station, which is about 900 units. So you're saying the only time, if you revoke the 200 dwellings, the only time you would look at it would be in the conditional zoning process?
If you were to revoke it in full, another option could be, are there certain parts of that really concern you? Is it still, could it be the apartments? You could separate out that the apartments need to come back, but the single family townhomes don't. You could make a different threshold that if it's, for example, if it's still over 500, you want it to come back for an SUP. There's all sorts of different ways to slice that if there's thresholds that we want to consider.
What if within that conditional zoning, if it comes in with 900, I'll just use 900 units, and they decide to modify it substantially, but it falls within the conditional zoning, and they're going to go from 500 apartments to 400 townhomes, and they're going to flip it. Go to 400 apartments and 500 townhomes. Would that have to come back before, or would that be at the staff level?
So if the density goes up or those numbers change within the parameters in the UDO, those things have to come back for a new rezoning. So there's no, if they completely...
New rezoning or change the conditions in the zoning?
Through a whole new rezoning.
To change, if it's a major modification, and the UDO does kind of define some parameters that the planning director can grant, but if it meets the criteria for a major modification, they must go through the rezoning process again. So that would be a public hearing, getting referred to the planning commission, and then coming back for adoption. And that would be any conditions.
I think that's one of the concern I have is if you don't keep some parameters on it for someone to make a modification, and that modification bumps right up to where it's a major, but they don't cross that threshold. But if we looked at it, we thought that looks pretty major to me, but by the law, by the UDO, it doesn't match that. That's the only thing. You know, we've seen that with the, help me, Mr. Dellinger, the mixed use with the ones where they could do so many homes because they max out the variety of projects to townhomes to 35-foot width, this width, because they can. It's allowed, what is it? What's the zoning? MXE, what is it? CXE, one of them is something. The mixed use projects where they can do townhomes, the narrow townhomes, single family apartments, but you can play with the numbers to get the narrow lots. You can play with the density.
It's on the density side.
Yeah, the density side.
That's baked into our UDO now because of the setbacks and things that we have that are so small. They just run us over with density that doesn't work for good neighborhoods. So that's in our UDO. Wonder about UDO changes. There's one we should look at as those setbacks.
Yeah, because they go to where they can go and get by with it. Yeah. I'm just wondering if something like that could happen here, where they could come back and say, we're gonna change whatever we have to do, and they can, basically you're telling me that's gonna be viewed as a substantial change, but again, what if they go right up to the threshold and stop? And in our eyes, or in the public's eyes, it may be a substantial change. That's the concern I have, is someone who knows what they're doing and who massages the UDO to their benefit.
Yeah, I think you're making a good point, Mr. Singleton. We don't want to write any blank checks. We don't want to, and the homestead at Bryan Farms was an example that as their first pass, it was the vast majority were townhouses. Council expressed displeasure with that. They came back where the vast majority were single family. Got some progress, and we're okay with that. But I think what I'm hearing Mr. Singleton say, we don't want to say, yes, we'll settle for the 80% single family home and 20% townhouse. We pass the zoning, and then they do the old flipperoo later. We will have to have this written where you can't go back and radically change what we just approved. I don't know the technical way to do that, and I'll pass along to Ms. Behringer for comments and questions.
I would be in favor of streamlining the process where feasible. Don't want us to be taken advantage of, but if we are spending more time than we need to spend to get the same job done, then I would like to see it streamlined and brought into a little shorter time frame.
Thank you. Mr. Dellinger.
So I'd say if we don't want to be taken advantage of, we leave it exactly as it is. And the reason is, maybe the reason they're agreeing to these things during the rezoning and volunteering to do them is because they know there's a special use permit waiting on the other side. So they might as well do it voluntarily and have us make them do it during the special use permit. What happens when you get rid of that special use permit? Well, now it might not necessarily be so voluntary with what they want to do. And we can say we're going to make them do it, but we actually can't. Our attorney will tell you, well, we can't make them do it. And our window of denying a project gets smaller and smaller and smaller. So let us not think that the glad handing and the conversations we have and they're being friendly. I would probably suspect some of these on this list, these three, they're like, well, if we're nice during the rezoning, maybe we can get rid of the special use permit. We don't have to do that. Those three that are on that list right now, they went through the process, came into our door, knew what the process is. They moved forward knowing there's a special use permit in place. They didn't have any problem with it. They got through the process. They knew what the process was and they agreed to it. I also have not had a single resident contact me and think this was a good idea or mention it to me. So that gives me pause too. I don't see this groundswell for changing this. The other thing is, there was that one thing that's not on this list is that solar farm project that we had. What was the name of that project where they had an existing special use permit and then came back?
Road.
That special use permit hadn't have been there. Forget that. Amazon. Special use permit was the only thing that got us lights and got us, but when COVID happened, they wanted to open early. The fact there was a special use permit in place there was the only recourse we had to get them to stick to what they said they were gonna do. And that was years ago. That was years and years ago. I feel an obligation to maintain the discretion that the law allows us to have as a council on these large, impactful projects. There are potentially unintended consequences of getting rid of it or removing it that change the dynamics in a way we can't foresee and may put us in a position where we have less discretion. If it's not broken, we got projects coming to us that have been approved. We got a long list of them that didn't have a problem with the special use permit. I can see on a larger commercial scale, that's a problem. We've had that, we've resolved that. But the record shows that this special use permit is not an impediment to getting these large projects in the town. So I don't think it's worth modifying at this time when everybody seems to have gotten along just fine with it. So that's my 2 cents.
Okay, Mr. Vance?
Yes, in reference to the time lag when it comes to projects that have been sitting on the shelf for a while, and which thought processes evolve and things change, consideration as to special use permit may be warranted. But there may be opportunities such as the ones that have been mentioned here where a thorough vetting of the projects have taken place during the Tier 2 process, where we have looked at, discussed, and gone through back and forth. And the time lag between when the Tier 2 process takes place to the actual moving forward the project is relatively limited. Then to have it looked at again for the same thing, it could be a better use of time and resources for specific projects. I think it's worth looking and see how it can be modified to make it one where it's a balanced, more balanced approach. Those projects that are more complex may need to be looked at more thoroughly and more in a sequential manner, where a special use permit is permitted. However, those projects which are relatively straightforward, moving rapidly, and there has been constant coordination throughout the process, and being clear to the public as to what's transpiring through the open meetings, and providing the records, making them available as to the discussions that have been had. I think that it's beneficial to look at those projects which is pretty clear. And these, in my mind, the ones that have been presented here, the Homestead at Bryan Farms and Bethel Green, and possibly even a Village at Garner Station, that was a unique one of the larger ones. I can see where it could be some concerns there, but the others, they've been thoroughly reviewed and going back and forth, whereby to come back to look at what we've already done, and the time lapse has not been that significant. Then that can be subjective as to say what's a significant time frame. Will be a better use of time to consider, not necessarily consider looking at how certain projects can be, I guess, like for a better word, exempt from the special use permit process if it's clearly vetted in the Tier 2 process.
Mr. Mayor, a concrete example is the Cambria project, that Pulte project, where that special use permit happened, I think maybe 30 days after the rezoning. It was November and in December. That's one of the few projects that we actually introduced some changes in the special use permit and did a one-way road connection. So sometimes it's not because they weren't being amenable to it during the rezoning process.
Say that again.
They weren't looking to do it during the rezoning process voluntarily. And so we were able to come in because we still have this special use permit process in place. And during that public hearing here from the public, say this is a problem that they did not address and they didn't want to address it. We made them address it because of this process. This is the backstop we have. As fast as it can move, again, that's probably the shortest, correct me if I'm wrong, Jeff, you probably don't know off the top of your head, this may be the shortest time lag we've had between a rezoning and a special use permit. I think the special use permit notice went out the night of the council meeting, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, they were working on they were working on theirs very close together for sure.
And it's folks like that who are moving so quickly and don't want to really listen to the public and don't want to listen to us that this helps protect us from. And they got their special use permit and decided to go illegal burn a bunch of times. So most folks are going to do it the right way and listen to us. But what do we do when the few come through that just want to barrel their way through and ignore some significant issues with their project? We don't have, as our attorney will tell us, we don't have a lot of leverage in that regard sometimes.
Good point, Mr. Matthews.
I'm hearing my colleagues and understand where they're coming from. Let me ask you this. This might be more of a legal question. If it's a tier 2 and it comes to us and we do our due diligence here and we make these changes, once we it goes to the planning commission and then, it comes back and we approve it, say we approve it, they recommended approval. Legally, once that has, we approve that particular project just the way it was presented to us, they should not be able to go back and make any kind of changes without starting that process over again. Is that a fair statement?
Well, they obtain vested rights to that project, but our UDO does allow them to make certain minor modifications. And those are outlined during that process. And usually that, they might lose a lot or two or redesign something, but they can't make major modifications without going through the process again.
Okay.
Okay, yeah. Well, that's great feedback, and Jeff, you've done a great job of putting it out here, and I like the way that you've put in three options there. The very third part says option. Leave it as is, repeal it in full, or modify it. And I think it's worth looking at the idea of modifying certain cases or certain categories of these. We're not making a decision tonight. I've heard one or two folks say we should leave it like it is. I've heard nobody say let's repeal it in full. We don't want to give them a blank check. But I have heard a couple of people say we should think about modifying it. So what I'm going to ask, if you're asking for the stance of the council, if you and your staff would take another look, see if we can tighten up section C under the modify. What could we do to modify it? What could we do to where we're not opening the door to abuse, that we feel comfortable about it? What can we do that will work when we know it's exactly this product that we're looking at, and that's what will be delivered? Is there a way to do that and save some of the double time? Because I have heard developers and staff and councilmen say, why are we looking at the same thing over and over? It's taking extra time. Time is money, both on the developer side and the staff side. So if you would, Jeff, come back to us with the same three options: leave it, repeal it, or modify it this way, and we could look at a little more specifically what modification could make it effective and efficient, but not give away the farm. And maybe that's impossible. If it is, we'll leave it as it is. If it's possible that we can improve it, make it more effective and efficient without giving away the farm, or it just makes us pay very close attention knowing that we won't have the SUP, but it's worth considering, I think. Again, we're not taking a vote tonight.
And if y'all are interested too, I would also encourage you to look at that section 4.8.2, subsection B. Those are the major modification criteria. So that is when, if they do change something that runs afoul of those thresholds, it does have to go back through the whole process from the get-go.
Yeah, help us understand that and see what the double checks are, the checks and balances.
So to go back to Village at Garner Station, Mr. Singham, was it 900? Did we say 900 units, give or take? For example, there, B3 would note that an increase or a decrease in the number of residential dwelling units by more than 10%. So if it's 900, 10% would be 90. So that would give them that level of flexibility. But if they go more than that in either direction, it would have to come back for a brand new rezoning. And maybe it's that those criteria need to change potentially as well. Maybe 10% is too much variability. Maybe it needs to be 5. So that could play into the discussion as well. But it's not just that. There's also, if they modify any of their design standards, I would argue, probably might want to clarify this in the ordinance, but I would argue that setbacks play a part in that, that those are a design standard. Again, if it just says, if the approving ordinance just specifies the minimum, as long as they stay in bounds with their minimums, they're fine. But if they did propose, let's say the minimum side setback was, I think we have that, I think the narrowest we can go is the 6 feet on the one side and 15 feet combined. And let's just say that they volunteered to do 10 feet on both sides. That then would be a condition. If they wanted to try to step back from that and go back to what the UDO said, that would be a change to the design standard because they committed to something greater. So yeah, there's just some, it's hard to anticipate every possible change in the ordinance, but I think they did a pretty good job of trying to cover it.
Yeah, and I'd say I have just a couple questions as part of this research. How many of these projects have we missed out on, residential projects, because we had a special use permit? That's different on commercial. I don't get the sense that anyone has not come to Garner because we had a special use permit. 2, map out the timeline between the rezoning for all these projects and when that special use permit happened. The other, I tell people, every once in a while a developer will contact me. And I say, well, that's a special use permit. I say, you know what, if you've done your job, special use permit is the easiest part of the whole process because you've done it all. You just show up with your attorney, bring your attorney in here, go through your little conditions, and we're like, well, they've already done all the work. Bye. They're paying their attorney for a night of work to get through SUP process. Also, if you look at a list of things we have required, well, we made somebody put in elevators so people could actually access some EV chargers and affordable housing. One of the reasons we've been able to get any traction on that on the legislative side is because they didn't probably want to come back and have to do it in SUP when they didn't have any control whatsoever over what we did. So again, we need to think through a lot of these projects and how they may have played out differently if we had not had that special use permit in place. A lot of the conditions we get voluntarily on the rezoning are a result of them wanting to move the process along and not drag it into a special use permit. So just some context and how I'm kind of thinking about unintended consequences of changing our process.
Yes, you're exactly right. Those are points well taken, case studies that need to be done, analysis that we need to do. But I think it's worth considering. Mr. Matthews?
I thought, Jeff, and you guys might be on top of this because I've sat through the Triangle meeting, as a bunch of us have, and you hear what other communities are doing. Is there a way we can find out, like some of our sister communities, how they're dealing with this? You might already have that information. I don't know. Whether it's Holly Springs or Apex or Fuquay, are they doing a similar process that we're doing, or?
I haven't done that research recently. The last time I looked, which was maybe 2 or 3 years ago, I couldn't find that anybody else was doing it how we are. But we can certainly add that in and check to see, because I know different jurisdictions are always looking at different ways of doing things.
And the reason I said it, when we had that meeting, it was a very good meeting, and you were there, and when they come up and said, well, Garner's the only one that's requiring this, and I'm thinking, and if everybody else has got a similar or easier way of doing this, but at the same time taking care of the town at the same time, is something we could look at. It might, if it's working here, get feedback, yeah, that's working great, because we've not had any issues and so on. So that was just a thought that we could, some of your counterparts in the other towns, or whether it's Wake Forest, or those high growth towns, how are they doing it? What's the upside and downside? It might be right under our nose and we're just not seeing it.
Yeah, excellent point. You're making an excellent point. Mr. Dellinger made an excellent point. We need, and I'm hearing some thought that it's worth looking at. There's enough councilmen that we don't want to give away the farm. We don't want to get baked and switched. We don't want to get end runs around. We don't want to be out of step with our neighbors, making it more costly, more difficult under any circumstance. And the good news is we don't have to make a decision tonight or this month. We don't have to make a decision this month. This is not on fire. It's important, but it's not urgent. So if you would go back and talk with your staff, talk with your peers, think about the issues that have been raised, the concerns that we have, the loopholes we're afraid of leaving, the efficiency we want to gain, and see if it's possible to come back with your same three options, leave it as it is, repeal the whole thing, which is not likely, or modify it this way that seems to be in line with getting our goals and not getting the end runs. So if you would do that, then we can look at it again in a month or two, or whatever is a reasonable time frame. It's important, but not urgent. You have many other alligators snapping at your ankles, even as we speak.
Understood.
So thank you for the input. Thanks for the presentation. I'm going to say we've completed that item, and we can move along to the next thing on the agenda. Thank you, Jeff. And the next thing on the agenda is one of my favorite parts. It's the manager reports.
Good evening, Mayor, members of council. In your agenda packet for this evening is a preview of what we've got scheduled for our April meetings, and I'll just take a few moments to review some of the highlights for you. Looking ahead to our April 1st regular meeting, under presentations, we'll be recognizing Chief Smith, as she will soon be retiring from the town. We've got quite a few consent items that we need to take care of. We have quite a few public hearings, several annexation requests, one being for the new Bojangles. Under new old business, looking at some stormwater amendments. And then looking at old new business, we'll also be kicking off sort of our public comment and feedback timeline for the FY26 budget. As you're aware, in years past, we've opened up an online portal that we've allowed residents to be able to give us feedback and questions and ideas. And so we'll be opening that up and demoing the portal at your meeting. Looking ahead to your April 15th regular meeting, we're going to hear from our friends at Garner Groves to give us an update on their project. And we'll also be recognizing the South Garner women's tennis and basketball champions. We have several public hearings that will be scheduled. Garner 6 Industrial, Mahler's Creek, Renmore Pines. And then we talked about the nuisance ordinance amendments at your last meeting. This will be coming back for public hearing at your April 15th meeting, as we discussed. And then we have our quarterly reports as well. We'll have our monthly talk of the town, and then we'll have our financial report and our capital report at the April 15th meeting. And then April 29th is our work session. We have a few items teed up for the work session at this point. First, as part of our budget process, we'll be talking about the FY26 through 30 proposed CIP. We started that discussion at your February retreat, and now we've done some refinements, have made some amendments to it, and so we'll be bringing that back for further discussion and feedback from council. We'll be looking into our code revision project further and looking at the issue of junk vehicles for council's discussion and guidance on that, excuse me. And then we, as council knows, we have been working on some town rebranding in conjunction with the rebranding of the fire department. And so we are going to have our friends at Graphic House join us for the work session to give you some ideas and feedback about what we've learned when we've done our community survey and some ideas of concepts. And so looking to get your feedback and ideas and guidance on those. And then we'll have our pending agenda report at that meeting as well. So that's a brief overview of our April meetings. Happy to answer any questions that council may have.
Questions for town manager?
Yeah, on the rebranding, what's the timeline for getting that done? Is it set? I mean, what if we get to this point and whatever they present, we're just like, this is awful, you need to go back? Like, what's our time frame?
So timeline, first, our priority is the fire rebranding. So we're hoping to get that done. And I think we're really close to that piece of it in terms of the merger as of July 1. That's specifically for the uniforms and badges and patches and those kinds of things. The town rebranding piece is going to take longer because there's more opportunity for discussion and input. And so we have targeted the end of summer is when we'd like to have sort of a final design ready for approval for council. But certainly if it takes longer than that, we're willing to put the time in because it's a really important discussion and decision for the town.
Welcome home, Phil Matthews. Welcome home.
Yeah, welcome home. You got a good memory.
Welcome home.
It does have a sizzle to it.
Just makes me feel good just hearing it. Ms. Miller, anything else?
That's all I have this evening. Thank you, Mayor.
Okay, good questions. How about attorney reports?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Aaron Gibbs and I will be attending the Municipal Attorneys Winter Conference this Thursday and Friday. I'll be attending in Chapel Hill. Ms. Gibbs will be attending virtually.
Okay, great. We appreciate your commitment to continuing education. Let's see. And that brings us along to council reports. They're not specifically committee reports, but any reports from council. And let's start back with Mr. Vance. Any reports, comments?
Don't have a council report, but just would like to remind everyone that this week the HR committee will begin interviewing for the vacant positions on various boards and commissions. And hopefully we'll be able to provide some recommendations in the not so distant future.
Excellent. Thank you for helping put that together. Mr. Dellinger.
I would like to say Mr. Dillinger as well and the staff as well.
Indeed.
No reports.
Ms. Behringer?
Yes, sir. I have one. You all have probably noticed by now that the sculpture has been installed at our lot on the corner of Avery Street and West Garner Road, drawing lots of really positive comments and making people smile. And we also just installed our third utility cabinet wrap at Garner Rec Center. So if you haven't been by there and gone into the parking lot to see what it looks like and to prepare to think it's wonderful, by all means do it right away.
And is there a proposed date out there for the unveiling?
The unveiling is, am I okay to say this, Chief Poole? I mean, Assistant Manager Poole, okay. April 23rd at 10 a.m. on site at the lot at the corner of Avery Street and West Garner Road.
More details, more publicity to follow, right. But I think it's good to have a real milestone ceremony for our first public works sculpture specifically. We've had other art, but having a sculpture, particularly of this magnitude, is really, really special. Thanks for the job you've done on that. Mr. Singleton?
Yes, I'd like to thank staff and in particular Public Works for the dramatic improvement in our flower beds at the front of Town Hall. It looks so much better than it did a year or so ago. It's nice to see some color out there, and I know that will change during the season. We know we have to plant hot, warm weather plants that can take the heat when it gets that time of the year. But anyway, it looks dramatically better than it did, and I appreciate the improvement over the past year.
Thank you. Mr. Matthews?
I have nothing.
No reports. Well, there's no more council reports. There's no closed session tonight. And unless there's some other business that needs addressing here, I would accept a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Mr. Matthews and second by Ms. Behringer. All in favor of adjournment signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed by nay? Meeting adjourned. Great progress, all of you. Thank you.